Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, we're going to cover yet another earthquake that hit Japan around that Fukushima area again. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has continuously been in the news, and Putin actually calling out pro-Western supporters in his country at a recent rally. But first, we're going to cover that 7.3 magnitude earthquake that shook up Japan's northeast coast off the city of Fukushima, leaving at least one person dead and many more injured. It was felt more than 200 miles away in Tokyo as well. Sadly, the city is still rebuilding from the devastating tsunami that struck the city back in 2011.
Well, as many celebrated St. Patrick's Day, the Prime Minister of Ireland had to miss a scheduled meeting with President Biden over a recent positive COVID diagnosis. But this year, many are celebrating St. Patrick's Day after 2 years of not being able to due to social distancing mandates during the height of the pandemic. Now, there are some concerns, though, over a new strain of COVID that's on the scene.
Well, as many get together to celebrate COVID cases in China and Europe are currently on the rise, including in some areas where COVID mandates have been relaxed. Europe has trended about 3 to 4 weeks ahead of the United States in its COVID patterns. And in the U.S., experts are already seeing an increase of COVID in the wastewater. That was said by Dr. Celine Gounder, a senior fellow with Kaiser Health News, in an interview with CBS Evening News.
And we've reported several times in Ekatan where they test the wastewater to see where the next surge, or where they're going to see the next surge because they're finding it there first.
That's right.
Well, she continued, the increase in wastewater indicates that we're also heading for a surge here in the U.S. again. Now, the new daily cases of COVID are down 96.2% from the peak of Omicron. Now, the spread of the new BA2 subvariant is more transmissible. It isn't more severe than the Omicron strain, and the doctors say that vaccines and prior infections are effective against this new strain.
Dr. Gounder said that gatherings that are outside in open spaces are okay, but if it's indoors in a crowded area like a large bar, well, that could result in more transmissions. It'll take a few weeks to see if St. Patrick's Day celebrations will lead to more COVID cases. And of course, this comes as federal funding for COVID is getting ready to run out as soon as next week.
Well, Jilin province in China is the latest epicenter for a COVID outbreak. Now, hundreds of positive cases have been found in the last few days. A new hospital has been set up to accommodate 1,500 people. Now, further to the south in the city of Qingdao, citizens are ordered to take COVID-19 tests by community medical workers. Cases of infections are surging throughout the country, with thousands of cases being reported in the last few days.
It's the biggest outbreak since the pandemic began, and in the city of Shenzhen, more than 17 million people have been put under lockdown for at least a week. People can only leave home to buy necessities, and all public transportation has been suspended. The forced closure of businesses and industries in the tech hub saw China's stock market drop in the past few days.
Well, the office where Al Jazeera is stationed in China had one case found which shut the entire office down, and everyone there had to work from home. Now, everyone was told to quarantine while working from home until further notice. China's National Health Commissioner Li Jiming said that a rapid antigen test that they have recently been made available to the public for the first time. He said, quote, antigen tests cannot replace nucleic acid tests, but they can help to identify the possible source of the infection in a timely manner before nucleic tests can be conducted.
Experts outside of China have criticized China's zero-tolerance strategy approach as unsustainable, but of course China has pushed even harder, saying that it's kept deaths and the virus to a minimum as a result, of course, of their efforts.
Well, now for more on the new version of the Omicron, the BA2 subvariant that is growing internationally, Dr. Alok Patel, a contributor for ABC News, said of the new subvariant, we're in a much better place now in regard to immunity and treatments. But this new variant is more transmissible and able to evade some of the available treatments and waning resistance, which is shown to drop down after, notice, 5 months.
Interesting, 5 months. He also said that with restrictions being lifted in addition to those other factors is the reason why we're seeing individuals who are 65 and up be at least or be a little more of an increased risk for, of course, infection, which is why there's discussion about a fourth booster shot and the reinstating of masks. Well, Patel also said that lifting mask mandates were done a little too soon and that people should be prepared to do what is necessary to protect the 9+ million immunocompromised people, even if that includes reinstating masks. And I know a lot of people are very tired of wearing those masks and they couldn't wait till those restrictions were relaxed so they can kind of get out of those things.
Right, now they're saying they might put them back on.
That's right.
Well, both Moderna and Pfizer are making requests for a fourth booster shot, but there's some concern because of a lack of data for younger, healthier age categories needing a booster compared to people 65 or older and those with compromised immune systems. Now, worldwide, more than 30 companies have begun to make a generic version of Pfizer's COVID pill, which has been shown to cut the rate of hospitalizations or death by up to 90% and would make the pill available up to half of the world's population.
Now, the question remains regarding the production of Pfizer's COVID pill that's in the works to be produced by about 90 countries is the question being, how soon will the pill be available for those in need? For example, Ukraine was offered a license to make the pill, but they can't because of the ongoing conflict there. And of course, there's sometimes variable issues in other countries as well. So there might be delays in the availability of the pill as the new subvariant cases continue to double every few weeks.
Well, we're now going to turn to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has been covering several stories. The first one being the growing food prices that is really starting to affect everyone, globally. Yeah. These food prices going up. And we're going to see later on in our news broadcast here how this ties into the Russia-Ukraine situation. So, and some of the exports and really some of the sanctions that Russia's been dealing with. So, Larry, what do you have on the food prices on the rise?
There are a number of different factors which are smoldering underneath the scene and threatening at any time to ignite into a full-blown calamity, and food insecurity is one of them. It is an issue born not so much of scarcity as it is profiteering. Leading analysts have been forecasting famine for years, which in many cases is not so much a state where food is absent, but where it is present and available, yet priced so high that only the wealthy can afford it. The accuracy of those forecasts are now starting to materialize for some working class Americans who are having difficulty keeping the cupboard stocked amid skyrocketing food prices. Companies are figuring increased costs on their end related to materials and fuel for the need to raise prices, but consumer watch groups say that it is really nothing more than a small group of merchants operating in an allied monopoly to supercharge profits. Though there are many who disagree with the idea of competition being great for business, it is nonetheless a very entrenched idea ingrained in the economic thought of most Westerners, so that the problem is being identified by some analysts as an issue of no competition rather than an issue of character, which would work to prevent unfair pricing and taking advantage of consumers just to start. The embattled president of the Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, has stated that the fall of his country could signal the start of World War III, while Chinese officials are accusing the U.S. of spreading disinformation concerning the war and targeting Beijing with dangerous intentions. China maintains that it has chosen to exercise restraint and diplomacy in the matter, but since Moscow and Beijing have close ties, Washington asserts otherwise. And in a recent meeting between the two nations, the U.S. press secretary is reported to have warned his Chinese counterpart that there will be severe economic consequences should they choose to assist Moscow in any way that helps them to elude the pressure of sanctions. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Tom Jeff, back to you.
Interesting. I think those rising food prices, we know that there's a lot going on in the international community with the conflicts, but those food prices are really hitting people close to home. You know, food prices and many other factors or areas of life that are increasing, that's putting a big strain on many, many families.
Right, and although some might not be directly involved with the war, they're all involved with food.
That's right. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden talked for more than 2 hours over the phone, looking for ways to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine. Even though the two leaders were holding dialogue, by the end of the call, President Xi did not promise he wouldn't help out longtime ally Russia. So far, Moscow has asked China to provide ground-to-air missiles, drones, and, of course, money.
Well, the Chinese president made it clear that President Putin will have to choose to back down from the fight. China will not put any pressure on him to do it. Now, the United States has warned China that aiding Russia in the war, either financially or militarily, would lead to the West imposing brutal sanctions upon their country.
Well, on the same day as the two leaders were speaking, President Putin spoke to Russian citizens at a rally in Moscow's largest stadium. In this rare speech, President Putin was praising Russians for being unified over the war in Ukraine, and this despite the fact that the government has limited much of the media coverage of the military campaign in the neighboring countries and widespread protests across Russia, which have led to 15,000 arrests.
Well, the sign behind Putin read, "For a world without Nazism." Now, he claimed that the goal of the war was to put a stop to genocide taking place in Ukraine. And just 2 days prior, Putin had said in a speech that those who do not support their country are, quote, scum and traitors. Now, while the president, Mr. Putin, wasn't concerned with Russians who owned vacation homes in the United States, those whose hearts and minds were aligned with Western thinking were his target.
Well, he referred to a group in Russia called the Fifth Column, who he believed were working to undermine the government. His tone and words were harsh, calling them bastards and traitors and comparing them to a gnat that one spits out of his mouth. Well, he encouraged the true Russian patriots to distinguish between them and cleanse them out of the country.
Well, just a little religious background now. Putin is a staunch member of the Russian Orthodox Church, but he has met with Catholic popes multiple times. 9 months after he became pope in 2013, Putin met with Pope Francis. Now, their meeting was sparked by them both encouraging the United States not to invade Syria 1 month earlier. In 2015, the two met again. This time, it came the year after Russia had annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. Now, during their meeting, Pope Francis urged Mr. Putin to respect the ceasefire agreement and allow humanitarian workers to enter the region.
Then in 2019, President Putin arrived an hour late to his meeting with the Pope. Some of our viewers might actually remember our coverage on that story. Well, during their hour-long talk, they spoke about Russia's increased presence in Venezuela, Syria, and Ukraine. Well, the Pope's gift to President Putin at the time was a message of peace he gives to world leaders. The president thanked the Pope for the, quote, very substantial and interesting conversation, end quote.
Well, as a side note, that same week, the Pope went on to meet with the leaders of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, including the major bishop who strongly opposes any Russian advancement into Ukraine. Now, in total, President Putin has visited the Vatican 6 times, which is more than almost any other political leader. In 2007, he met with Pope Benedict XVI, and he met twice with Pope John Paul in 2000 and 2003.
Well, the White House announced today that President Biden will be traveling to Brussels, Germany, which is NATO's headquarters, for a special meeting. Well, the goal is to assess the situation in Ukraine with his counterparts. That's right. The White House would not say if the president intended to visit the Ukrainian border or try to meet with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. President Zelensky has been pushing Europe to impose a no-fly zone over his country, but many NATO allies oppose the no-fly zone because it would put NATO and Russian planes in direct conflict with each other, which could potentially lead to an all-out war, especially when you're dealing with situations where, there's an accident, then there's a retaliation for that accident, and next thing you know, it escalates very quickly to international conflict.
Right, so NATO is saying they don't want to take the risk of getting involved or drawn into that war.
That's right.
Well, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is also meeting with NATO defense ministers for a 2-day gathering at Brussels headquarters. President Zelensky continues to plead his case, speaking to Canadian Parliament, pleading, quote, "Close the airspace. Please stop the bombing. How many more cruise missiles have to fall on our cities until you make this happen?" End quote. Now, next, he's planning to speak to U.S. leaders at a joint session of the U.S. Congress.
The United States has been helping Ukraine out in many ways. This week, the president signed a spending bill that could include or will include $13.6 billion for Ukrainian security and humanitarian assistance. President Biden explained, "We're moving urgently to further augment the support to the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their country." The money will provide aid for Ukrainian refugees in Ukraine and surrounding countries as well. It also includes military equipment and training to use that equipment.
While the focus is on Ukraine right now and its victims of war, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition says there are many more victims as a result all over the world, especially in the Middle East and North Africa. Oil, gas, and also the food supply are being affected. Please take a look at this next video.
This war could mean so much for so many people around the world. Obviously, Ukrainians are the immediate victims, but there are victims all over the world, and in the Middle East and North Africa in general.
Затянуть пояса.
وبالتالي أعتقد هذا الارتفاع هو ارتفاع يعني ليس ارتفاع تدريجي وإنما ارتفاع مفاجئ. يعني هناك بعض السلع ضعفين وهناك سلع أخرى 3 أضعاف.
Inflation is not just food, it's energy, it's everything. So this is also the other thing that we have to really contemplate on. You're not talking about food in isolation. look at the fertilizer market, look at the energy market. All these things come together. So the pressure on especially the most vulnerable, I do not think has been greater than this since the Second World War.
Well, a couple things to note there, Katan, in the video, that as they mentioned, food prices have been the highest ever in the past 61 years. And now what we're seeing take place in Ukraine, where they have a lot of crops like the wheat crop that they talked about, but now the Ukrainian people are having to flee, so they're not harvesting those crops. And with Russia being an exporter of 30% of the global wheat production, but now they're saying they're not willing to send that out due to the sanctions, the heavy sanctions that are being imposed upon them. So now you see that the food, as we mentioned earlier, is really going to continue to skyrocket and affect everybody.
Yeah, and when people start to get hungry, they start to make impulsive, desperate moves. And you're going to see that push coming back from the citizens to the world leaders, and they're going to have to make some type of move. And as many have said in the past, and as we've pointed out in many of the previous broadcasts, nuclear war looks to be the very option that nations are going to use to express their point, protect their country, and protect themselves, keep themselves from becoming subjects to another nation's will.
Right, in a lot of situations taking place in the world, that war there between Ukraine and Russia, the food prices going up, which is what Yisrael Hawkins had taught all those years in the house of Yahweh, that we would see a shortage of food, famines taking place. And now we see with the prices going up so high, could perfectly lay out just like he said.
That's right.
Well, if you'd like to find out more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, and Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And as mentioned in times past, don't forget the Yisrael Says and Ask Yisrael programs. You can find those online by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is a classic sermon from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.